Hello, friends and frenemies, and everyone who just clicked play out of curiosity. Welcome back to Hot Air with me, Joshua Robert. So, in our last episode, if you listen to it, we went deep on the topic of conversion therapy, religion, and how LGBTQ plus people have been harmed in these programs. I basically summarized and generalized a lot of the experience of survivors, laying out the history, the first person stories, and the broader context. But here's the thing, summaries are one thing, but there is nothing like hearing people speak for themselves. So today, we're going to do something a little bit different. This episode is all about sharing the voices of survivors, their blog posts, memoirs, essays, and reflections straight from the pages that they wrote themselves. You're going to hear me reiterate it. The raw, unfiltered experiences, their struggles, their courage, and their reclamation of identity, all in their own words. No filter, no translation, no me trying to paraphrase, just real people telling their stories. And of course, as always, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod. Submit your own listener stories or share topic suggestions on my website, hotairwithjoshuarobert.com. You can also shop all of my fun merch there. We've got tumblers, t-shirts, which I'm wearing right now, hoodies, which I have in my closet, and mugs and stickers. I think that's all we have for now. We really should get some cute keychains, actually. But I decided that we're going to play a little game. If you're listening to this on the day that it is released, this is a Friday episode, we're going to play a game. What is Josh drinking? Because I always have my hot air mug handy. Sometimes, truthfully, sometimes it's wine. Sometimes it's straight up vodka. Sometimes it's a Cosmo or a lemon drop. Sometimes it's water. Sometimes it's coffee. Sometimes it's some electrolytes. Sometimes it's fucking empty and I'm pretending to drink. So I just thought it would be hilarious to start a new thing where every episode, if you go on my Instagram stories, you can vote/guess what I am drinking on today's episode. And then maybe 24 hours later, I'll let you know what's in here. So I'm going to take a sip. I mean, obviously it's not empty because you can hear it, but yum. I'll give you a hint. It's only Wednesday and it's been a long ass week. So it's not just water. And if you want to get your own hot air mug with the hot air logo and the I found your podcast to be egregious logo, you can head on over to my website. They're super cute. And I want to order 50,000 of them. So let's get to what you came here for. The raw, real experiences that I think deserve a voice. So let's hit it. Before we get into the extended excerpts, let me set the mood. And it's not a fun or hot mood, okay? Imagine being 18, closeted, scared, sitting in a church pew where people speak in scripture like normal people speak in emojis nowadays. You're already feeling like an absolute alien in your own skin. And then you are handed a pamphlet telling you that who you love is literally going to drag you into hell. Like it's a fucking sale on fires at the Devil's Outlet Mall or something. That's the world that Jared came from. A world where your future was already planned in the book of Jeremiah, but your sexuality was not included in the fine print. And this is a completely random side note, but I kept pronouncing his name Gerard. And then I was like, I think he's Australian, and I still could be mistaken. But then I remember this guy one time that I hooked up with, and I'm pretty sure I called him Gerard for like weeks that I knew him, or it was actually like months I knew him, and his name was Jared all along, and he was Australian. So that was me. That was me learning from my mistakes, and I pronounced Jared correctly, even though it's spelled a little funky. Now, Jared wrote the book Boy Erased, which is a smash hit, and nearly everybody has heard of this book. One of the things that he writes very early on, and this is longer than the short line I quoted before in a previous episode, is this. He writes, I was told that my attraction to other men was a symptom of brokenness, a crack in the soul where sin had taken root. And like any infection, it needed treatment. It needed intervention. And if I didn't fight it, I risked losing everything I'd ever been taught to love. That paragraph alone could be a thesis for conversion therapy as a whole. Convince people they are sick, then tell them that there's a cure and sell that cure to them. So Jared gets sent to Love in Action, which I'm convinced is one of the most ironic names since calling a spider Mr. Snuggles. Like, no. He describes his intake session in detail. The fluorescent lighting, the binder that is full of rules, and a staff member smiling so politely it should have been illegal. He writes, "They told me to think of them as family, but they spoke with the tone of wardens." And Lord, I should not say that anymore, because especially in this context. But if that doesn't sum up half of organized religion's relationship with queer people, I don't know what does. A lot of smiling, a lot of pretending that you're here to help and love, but really, it's all about control. And let's get into one of the longer scenes in this book, because this is where his writing punches you like right in the gut. Here's a fair use excerpt from a section where he's handed his moral inventory, which is basically a form where you list every sin, every sexual thought, every fantasy, every moment of weakness. It's like Catholic confession, but without the bless your heart at the end of it. He writes, "The moral inventory was 20 pages of questions that assumed my guilt. When did you first have homosexual desires? Who influenced you? What trauma preceded your fall? The questions were traps, funneling me towards a single conclusion, that something had been done to me, that I was not naturally this way, that something sinful had gotten inside me and taken root." And then he adds something that hits even harder. He says, "I tried to find a memory that would satisfy them, but the truth was simple. I had liked boys for as long as I'd liked anyone at all." If you're gay, can you not relate to that? Like, truly, you can hear the exhaustion in that line. Like, I'm tired just saying it. The quiet pain of someone being pushed to rewrite their own autobiography in a language that wasn't even theirs. And the pressure wasn't just internal. The staff pushed it. The group pushed it. Society pushed it. His family pushed it. Because that's how conversion therapy operates. Through an overwhelming flood of suggestions until you don't know where their beliefs end and your self-doubt even begins. Now, this next excerpt is a scene where the group sessions begin. These weren't like cozy support circles, no kombucha, no beanbags, no acoustic guitar playing, like none of that. These were basically interrogations dressed up as testimonies. And he writes, "We sat in a circle as each person was called forward to share their story. Some spoke in halting whispers, others in dramatic, tearful confession. But the emotion didn't matter. What mattered was that they shaped their past into something that fit the program's teachings. A man described his father as distant, and the staff seized on that. 'There it is,' they said. 'A weak father figure leads to homosexual desire.' Another spoke of being close to his mother. Again, they nodded. 'Too much feminine influence makes a boy confused.' We were being taught not to understand ourselves, but to translate our lives into a single approved narrative." This is so important because it reveals the psychological architecture of conversion therapy. If you can create a template for someone's brokenness, you can force them to fit into it. Doesn't matter if it's true, doesn't matter if it's helpful, it just needs to be the story the church approves. He continues to go deeper into these sessions that created emotional dependency. He describes one moment when a participant breaks down, sobbing uncontrollably, and instead of comfort, the staff treats this like a breakthrough. "Your real self is fighting the demons," they tell him. And Conley writes, "I remember thinking how easily pain could be mistaken for progress in that room." This is the same logic. This is the same logic behind half the bad relationships we've all been in. If it hurts, it must be love, like that kind of energy. Except here, it's if it hurts, it must be healing. And the answer to that is fuck no. If healing feels like torture, you are not in therapy. You're in a cult that just happens to have paperwork. Now, there's also the infamous family blame session, which some people have heard of before. This is the part where everyone remembers from the movie that was made of this book, but the book's version is even more devastating because it's real. Again, it's his voice, it's raw, and it's written from memory, not a screenplay. He writes, "When it was my turn, they asked me to talk about my parents. I tried to explain that both my mother and father loved me, that they had flaws, but none of them felt connected to my sexuality. The counselor shook his head. Denial, he said. Your father's career as a preacher means he was rarely home. That absence created a vacuum. Another staff member chimed in. Your mother is strong, is she not? Perhaps too strong. Perhaps you identified with her instead of your father. I felt cornered. They were telling me the story of my own life, my own childhood, as if I hadn't lived it. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is emotional gaslighting at a theological level. They're not just rewriting his identity or trying to, they're rewriting his family, his memories, his entire sense of reality. And this is only the beginning. So Jared is in the middle of this Love in Action program, the most ironically named organization outside of maybe like International Fellowship of Nice Guys Who Definitely Don't Have Rage Problems. Like, hello. The book doesn't waste time. Jared starts showing us how the program shifts from uncomfortable to downright dystopian. And when I tell you that these people invented psychological jump scares, I'm not exaggerating. One of the biggest emotional gut punches is the way they coached participants to blame their parents. Not just suggest, but coach. Imagine if Dr. Phil was run by a pack of Puritans who all hated gay people and thought empathy was witchcraft. Jared writes a much longer reflection on this moment. He says, it was as if they were waiting for us to name our parents as the source of our corruption, to accuse them of not loving us the right way. I felt them watching each word, assessing whether my answer aligned with their theology. The truth, that I came from a good home, that my parents' mistakes were ordinary and human, was dismissed. They wanted pathology. The more I insisted that my parents loved me, the more they insisted that love was the problem. And again, if that doesn't sum up the manipulative logic of religious fundamentalism, I don't know what does. Like, this is like all the evidence you need. It's the inversion of reality. Love becomes danger, affection becomes infection, and anything healthy is re-diagnosed as sin. It's like satanic reverse Uno cards. Like, come on. From there, the quote-unquote therapeutic exercises start escalating. And look, when a memoir uses the phrase therapeutic exercises and follows it with a description that sounds like the opening montage of a horror movie, you know that you are in for a ride. One of the most infamous exercises, and I'm going to give you the slightly longer version here because we want the meat of this information, was something they called the blame circle. Think of it like those trust-building games at corporate retreats, except instead of learning to fall backwards safely, you're learning to fall into shame. And Jared describes it as follows. A boy named Jack was told to stand in the middle of the room while staff members circled him. One of them began listing every perceived flaw. Weak, effeminate, insecure, confused. Another added more. Needy, broken, sinful. The litany grew, piling on from every direction. Jack hunched his shoulders. He was crying, but no one stopped. They said they were breaking down his defense. I remember wondering how a person was supposed to heal after being told that he was nothing. And this retelling stays with you like a bruise. We've seen iterations of this in movies and television shows, but to hear it or read it from the page of someone's memory, it just hits different. And not just because it's cruel, but because it's the theological equivalent of kicking someone when they're down and calling it salvation. The emotional violence is dressed up in spiritual language. Sanctification, breaking strongholds, rebuking lies. But what's happening is plain old psychological abuse. Except now, it's tax deductible because it's happening in a church basement. And again, I say, Jesus would not want people to treat others this way. Jared also writes about what they did with anger. Anger was currency in the program, but only when they decided that it was. He describes a session where they handed out foam bats and told participants to hit chairs while shouting accusations at their imaginary parents. He says, they said we needed to externalize blame. They told us to let the rage out, to strike the chair with the intensity we'd been holding in our whole lives. Some boys did it hesitantly, others with frightening force. The room echoed with shouts. Why weren't you there? Why didn't you protect me? Why did you make me this way? The staff nodded approvingly, but I felt detached. My parents had not abused me. They had not hurt me. They had simply believed what they had been taught. I didn't feel anger towards them. I felt grief. And this is where the memoir gets so powerful. Jared isn't screaming for revenge. He's mourning the spiritual maze they were all stuck in. His parents were not villains to him. They were victims as well, which I think for someone to realize that is huge. They were really like in the same building, just on different floors of the building. To use a metaphor that I don't know if that even makes any sense, but you probably get my gist. And now let's talk about one of the darkest chapters, the funeral exercise. You know, things have gone off the rails when therapists say, okay, everyone, today we're doing a funeral. Like, we're not talking about symbolic closure or releasing negative thoughts. No, baby. This was a full, acted out funeral for somebody that is still alive, designed to scare them straight, literally straight. Jared writes, they gathered us in the main room and told us we were going to witness what would happen if we continued in our homosexuality. A boy who had broken the rules was made to lie on the floor while others stood around him, pretending to mourn. They were instructed to say what they would miss about him, how his life had been wasted, how his parents would suffer. It was supposed to show him the consequences of sin. To me, it looked like a punishment designed to break his spirit. This is medieval theater meets cult psychology meets emotional waterboarding. Like, if the Salem witch trials had a summer camp, this would be the workshop. Jared, watching this, writes in one of the most heartbreaking lines in the entire book, it was the moment I realized they would rather see us dead than queer. And the horror of that is not in the dramatics. It's in the fact that these people truly thought, I think they truly thought, they were doing God's work. That's what makes conversion therapy uniquely terrifying. It weaponizes sincerity. The people hurting you often believe they are saving you. And sincerity in the service of cruelty is one of the most dangerous forces in the world. Now, let's shift to where Jared starts breaking free. Not physically yet, but emotionally. He begins noticing inconsistencies. He questions why so many rules contradict each other. He watches a staff member shame a participant for crying too much while praising another for crying the same amount. He realizes the rules are not about healing, they're simply about control. He says, the program felt less like a path to change and more like a narrowing hallway, where each step required me to leave behind another part of myself. It was not leading me to God, it was leading me to nothingness. And this is where his internal rebellion begins. Quiet, subtle, sacred even. The kind of rebellion that happens when someone realizes they don't want to die, they want to live, and they want to love, they want to be whole in a way that doesn't involve shame as a sacrament. This emotional turning point sets up the confrontation with his mother, which I don't want to spoil the whole book for you, so I'm not going to continue through sharing basically the entire thing. But when I tell you that this scene deserves basically a whole hour episode on its own, like, I'm not kidding, because Mama Conley does something very rare in these stories. She wakes up, and you should definitely get your own copy of Boy Erased. You can watch the film. I believe it's starring Nicole Kidman. But read the book first. I think it's always fun to read the book and the un-Hollywoodized version of events. So get yourself Boy Erased by Jared Conley. And that is where I will leave Jared behind, unless I stalk him on Instagram and try to get him on this podcast, which you better believe I have and will and did. But we are going to move on to a completely different story, some survivor blogs that I stumbled across during my research time. That is sometimes very late in the evenings and sometimes very early in the mornings. But let's begin with one of the most powerful survivor blog posts that I happened to stumble across. So maybe at like 2 a.m. or something, who knows, when I should have been sleeping, but was instead eating stale Doritos and researching homophobic nonsense, because that's my Roman Empire now, homophobic nonsense. This comes from a blog written by a survivor whose name I will not share here. But the title of the post alone deserves its own Oscar, a Grammy. It should be an EGOT, maybe a Tony, all the things. The title is, God Didn't Turn Me Straight, he helped me escape. Already iconic, already framed, already hung above my mantle if I had one, but it's the mantle in my head. So here's a portion of their writing exactly as they posted it. I spent 2 years in a church-run conversion program. We were told our queerness was a bruise, something God wanted to heal. But the longer I was there, the more it became clear that what they called healing was just breaking us in smaller and smaller pieces. They told me to imagine a version of myself that God could love, and every version they described looked nothing like me. I prayed every night, not to be straight, but for the courage to walk away. If that doesn't hit you in the chest like a Trader Joe's parking lot cart, I do not know what will. The level of spiritual manipulation here obviously is insane. A bruise? No, that's not a bruise. That's called personality. That's called identity. That's queerness. It's thriving. It's unbothered. The real bruise is whatever they are doing to their critical thinking skills. The writer of the blog goes on with this gut punch. What finally broke me wasn't the sermons or the so-called accountability partners or even the humiliation exercises. It was when I realized that every testimony they shared of someone changing ended with them crying. Why, if they were so free, did they always look so sad? And let me tell you something. These are my words. If your life transformation ends with you looking like you just watched the end of The Notebook and someone kicked your dog on the way out, that's not a miracle. That's trauma. And also, I'm never going to use the kick the dog example ever again. I don't know why I said that. Like, dogs are life. So they go on to write this. I walked out during prayer time. No dramatic speech, no shouting. I just stood up, walked out, and didn't look back. They told people later that I relapsed into sin, but the truth is, I finally stepped into sunlight for the first time in 2 years and felt God say, "Thank you. I've been trying to get you out." And oh my God, that gave me full body chills and made me very emotional. That right there is a queer mic drop, a spiritual mic drop. God in this story is the drag queen backstage whispering, "Sweetie, leave this boring gig and come to brunch with me." And honestly, that's theology that I could get behind. And I am so glad that the person that wrote this blog heard that voice from God. And what I love is that you can still believe in God and you can still find your religion and your joy and follow Christ if that's what you want to follow, but you don't have to go through this craziness. Now we're going to shift into another powerful piece. This one is from a memoir by a man who survived conversion therapy that was run by non-denominational evangelical groups. I'm going to read a few of his words because if you ever wondered what actually goes on in those programs, well, we're going to get into it. So put that emotional seatbelt right back on because this is some shit, people. He writes, "The first week, they made us write down everything sexual we had ever thought of." Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Not done, but thought. They called it confession documentation. They told us that writing it out would drain the sin from our minds. Instead, it just trapped us in a room with our shame. When I turned in my stack of pages, the counselor said, "This is too detailed. You're glamorizing the sin." I remember thinking, how can I win? I'm too gay when I'm hiding, and I'm too gay when I'm honest. Okay, and listen, back to my words. The way I would have turned this into a writer's workshop and been like, actually, Barbara, it's called imagery. It's called narrative tension. It's called fucking talent, bitch. But of course, they couldn't handle his creativity and his flair because the only things those programs produce are fear and beige interior design. But I reel in my irritation. He continues. Our sessions always ended with group prayer. They would lay hands on us, and I always felt like they were not praying for us. They were praying at us, praying on top of us. Some prayer felt violent, loud, demanding. It felt like they were trying to shake something out of me that wasn't even in me to begin with. And that is the thing. Prayer is supposed to be comforting and meditative and peaceful, like not like a spiritual WWE match. We're not wrestling here. And while this has all been dark, let's pivot a little bit to some affirming voices because we need a palate cleanser, I think, before everyone listening pulls over on the freeway and starts journaling about their childhood and writes their own memoirs. This next piece comes from a progressive LGBTQ plus affirming priest who shared his story on his church's website. And I am obsessed with him because his whole vibe screams like, I like God, but I also have a pierced ear and a dog named Clementine. Like, we can be all things at once, peeps. And here is what he wrote. People ask me why I welcome LGBTQ plus congregants as they are. And I always tell them the same thing, because Jesus did. Jesus didn't ask anyone to change before they were worthy of dignity. He didn't say, fix yourself first. He didn't say, become my ideal version of you. He met people exactly where they stood. If your theology can't do that, it's not Christ-like. It's just control. And that gets me too. Ugh. I didn't actually expect to get emotional this episode, but that hits me. He gets the assignment. It's like, this isn't, if you believe in God and Jesus, this is not what Jesus did. He gets the extra credit because he clearly aced the assignment. Like, come on, he gets this shit. He continues, my LGBTQ members have taught me more about resilience, authenticity, joy, and the power of chosen family than any seminary professor ever did. If queerness frightens you, the problem is not queer people. It's your fear, and fear is not a fruit of the Spirit. We should play another game. How many full body chills can Josh get in one episode? But tell me why this man is out here dropping truth bombs like he's hosting the Met Gala for theology. Fear is not a fruit of the Spirit should be printed on every tote bag across the nation, t-shirts, tattooed across the forehead of every conservative politician who uses the Bible as a mood ring. Now, let's add another voice, this one from a queer theologian whose work I found in an academic journal. But don't worry, they write like a human being and not like a microwave instruction manual. They wrote, the harm done to LGBTQ Christians is not simply emotional. It is architectural. Entire structures of belief have been built on the idea that God must be protected from queerness. But God is not fragile. God is not breakable. If your doctrine only works when certain people are excluded, it is not divine, it is dysfunctional. I swear, some people treat God like he's a small houseplant that wilts if you put him next to like a bisexual or something. But truly, like, some of this is like, I'm like, am I feeling the Spirit? Am I going to go to church on Sunday? Because I actually I feel like I'm having like some moments up in this bitch. But I mean, I think I would still, regardless if it was an LGBTQ plus church, I would probably erupt into flames, but maybe I should try it. I'll let you know. So now we're going to get into another excerpt from a memoir that I found online from a survivor named Eli. It's a pseudonym, who spent 3 years in a non-denominational program before leaving and writing about it. And I found this post buried in a Medium blog that feels like it was typed at like 3 a.m. with pure catharsis fueling the keys. And here's what Eli writes. Leaving the program was not like walking out of a room. It was like walking out of a coffin that someone built around my identity. The air outside was cold and bright, and every inhale felt like a lie I had been telling myself, finally evaporating. For the first time, I realized I could exist without shame coating my every thought. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and yet I was met immediately with a strange guilt. How dare I feel joy when my mentors had invested so much time in my misery? And that paragraph deserves a standing ovation. The metaphorical coffin, the cold, bright air, the emotional betrayal, it's all there. And that guilt, yes, conversion therapy programs cultivate it like a prized bonsai tree. They don't want you to feel freedom. They want you to feel indebted to your own oppression. Eli continues with some other things that I think are important to share. He says, the first thing I did was go online. I started reading other survivor stories. There were blogs, essays, a few old forum posts from the early 2000s. Everyone had the same thread running through their lives. Fear, isolation, shame, and finally this trembling, angry, beautiful reclamation. People were speaking in their own voices, unedited by programs, unfiltered by pastors, unafraid of God or men or bureaucracy. I was stunned. These were my people shouting from the digital rooftops, we are alive, we are still here, and we are ourselves. Okay, cue me screaming in my bedroom, right? Like, yes, queer internet survivor communities, we see you, we love you, and we're taking notes. Like, I love that that's like the first thing this person did. It's like, seek the help. Like, we know, how many times have I said this? If you want to learn how to bake a cake, you Google it. If you need support for anything, there is a forum, a website, a blog, a something for every single solitary thing where you can seek help and support and people that have experienced what you have experienced. The internet is a fucking shit show and a hellscape sometimes, but there are really good things about it that can bring us all together and help people that can't find that help right in their vicinity, their near vicinity, or their family or their friends. Just Google it, people. Please. Like, there's truly nothing more radical than a group of people telling each other in 2002 or 2025 or whatever year that your keyboard says that being queer is not only okay, but worthy of fucking celebration. And now let's pivot to another affirming voice who is very active in religious spaces that welcome queer folks, Reverend Jamal, which is also a pseudonym. Reverend Jamal shared his reflections in a piece for a progressive online ministry that I literally stumbled across late one night while trying to find more coffee memes and ended up crying into my laptop because sometimes I need memes for like really specific things that I'm trying to say and then I get really sidetracked because ADHD, right? But hey, we found something helpful for this episode. And that's what matters here. Reverend Jamal writes, I see so many young LGBTQ plus people in my community who have been told by parents, preachers, and peers that God wants them to be someone else. And every time I offer them a safe space, a community, a ritual where they can be themselves, I feel like I'm witnessing a quiet miracle. And I imagine it's not that quiet. A miracle of survival, of love uncoerced, of identity recognized. Faith can be an instrument of harm, yes, but it can also be a sword of liberation. More full body chills. I hope I'm burning calories every time I get full body chills. And then he adds another note here about humor, which I think is kind of iconic. He writes, sometimes the first thing I tell queer youth is, God made you fabulous, and if anyone tells you otherwise, you can tell them I said so. It gets laughs and then maybe some clarity. Humor is a bridge. Humor is rebellion. Humor is a coping mechanism. And honey, it's also a very necessary weapon. I mean, and if listeners, you haven't figured out, I use humor to deflect and also heal and make light of things so they're not so heavy all of the time. And I love this because it's exactly what Hot Air thrives on. Truth with a little shade, healing with a little sass, and liberation with a funny little comedy mic drop. I live for it. And don't worry, we're going to keep going. Let's bring in another survivor blog that hits just as deep. This one is from a writer named Lila, who identifies as non-binary and was sent to conversion therapy programs in the early 2010. I found it on a site that publishes survivor essays and reflections. And here's what Lila writes. I remember sitting in the group circle and hearing the leaders describe our queerness as temporary confusion. And I wanted to scream, temporary? This is my life. But instead, I took notes because I was learning the language of survival. I learned how to say the words they wanted to hear while keeping my inner truth locked in a drawer. And then one day, I burned the notes. Again, standing ovation. But that's such a good example of how us as queer people, a lot in life, we're trying to fit into situations, not always situations as deep or as heavy or as traumatizing as conversion therapy. But sometimes it becomes habit and natural for us to just shy away and do what we think we need to do in this status quo situation, in this status quo world that we live on. So that is super relatable, at least from my point of view. And Lila has more to say. She continues, after leaving, I joined an affirming spiritual community. We chant, we pray, we celebrate. And the first time I danced openly as myself in the chapel, someone came up and said, we were waiting for you. No, Josh, finish with no crying. That must feel so good to go through all that and then finally have this moment of feeling free, accepting yourself, being like, I can be in this chapel and I can love God and I can be non-binary or queer or all the things. And to have someone validate that and say that we were waiting for you is like, damn, that's some deep shit. I'm going to need to take a pause. I'm going to need to take a sip of whatever's in my mug to like breathe for a hot sec. Okay. Pause has been taken. We're back. So Lila continues. That moment, that sacred acknowledgement was the exact opposite of the isolation I felt in therapy. And for the first time, I believed that God could love me, even with glitter on my eyelashes and my pronouns on my forehead. Now we're talking. Glitter, pronouns, liberation meets drag, like iconic. This is, in my opinion, what God, universe, spirituality should be about. Freedom and celebration and like connecting. Like, Why? I'm just still so confused about conversion therapy, even though I've done 27,000 deep dives on it. Okay, and finally, let's look at a small snippet from a longer interview with a queer Catholic theologian who works in ministry with LGBTQ plus youth. Here's what they told an interviewer. The church has the capacity to be a place of profound trauma, yes, but also profound redemption. What's important is that we shift from a model of control to a model of accompaniment. We walk with people rather than trying to reshape them. And in that walking, there is liberation, there is joy, there is survival, there is real theology grounded in flesh, struggle, and love. Truly, like everything I said in this episode, you can feel it. These voices are building a mosaic, each one a different tile, but together they form this map, this beautiful picture from harm to healing, from shame to affirmation, from silence to speaking out. And that is what this entire episode is about. Listening to these voices, amplifying them, and acknowledging that while conversion therapy tried to erase them, these individuals persisted. And this is where the history, the horror, the hope, the humor collide, and we start asking the big questions. What the fuck does this all mean? How has conversion therapy impacted not just individuals, but communities, families, and religious culture? And most importantly, what can we do to support survivors and challenge these systems? Let's start with the survivors. We heard from Jared Conley in Boy Erased, Eli, Lila, and the anonymous blog writers. Their experiences, while unique, share a common thread: emotional manipulation disguised as spiritual guidance, the weaponization of guilt, and the imposition of shame as a tool to just control their identity. And what they all show is something that cannot be overstated. Surviving conversion therapy is not just about leaving a program. It's about reclaiming your sense of self in a world that tried to define you as broken, because you are not broken. And one of the longer reflections from Boy Erased kind of resonates here. Freedom was not simply walking out of love in action. Freedom was learning to speak my own story, to love my own truth, to recognize that my existence was not a sin to be corrected, but a life to be celebrated. Think about that. Freedom wasn't external. It was internal. And that's something that every survivor, every queer theologian, every affirming minister that I've read or read their interview quotes from in their own words, like it's not just about escaping one church basement. It's about escaping a mindset, a culture, a centuries-long system of belief that has taught us that queerness is shameful. Now, let's add back in that perspective of affirming clergy. Reverend Jamal, who we talked about just a few minutes ago, also wrote, faith can be weaponized, yes, but it can also be refuge. It's about walking alongside people, acknowledging their pain and affirming their existence. Liberation theology isn't just academic, it is practical. It's survival, it's community, and it is joy. And just that alone, coming from a reverend, shows us how religious institutions can function differently if they choose to. Instead of control, it's accompaniment. Instead of shame, it's affirmation. And instead of punishment, you have community. And isn't that the theology we've all been craving deep down? I know I keep saying this like we're getting to the end here, but there's so many more quotes that I found, and there's so many more things that keep popping up that I'm like, ooh, this adds another, I was going to say a fun layer. This adds a more hopeful layer. So let's actually look at a excerpt from a queer Catholic theologian that I found online, obviously. Another interview, because they articulate the cultural impact beautifully. Conversion therapy doesn't just harm the individual. It ripples through families, faith communities, and society. It tells parents that love is conditional. It tells children that their natural desires are sinful. And it tells congregations that God's work is enforcement rather than grace. The damage is systemic, not merely personal. And when you read that, it kind of clicks. This isn't just a problem of misguided counselors. It's embedded in religious culture and in law and in policy, in how society treats LGBTQ plus people, because most of our society runs off of religion. That's why awareness matters. It's why these voices matter, because systemic harm can only be challenged when we shine a light on it and laugh at it sometimes in order to survive, and then we take some action. Now, this episode is never going to end because we need to consider healing, which we haven't really explored in very much detail yet. Survivors often describe affirmation and community as key. Eli also said, "The moment I found people who understood my struggle without trying to fix me was revolutionary. Suddenly, I could breathe without guilt, celebrate without fear, and love without restraint." Then Lila, the non-binary writer, said, "Being affirmed in religious spaces where I could pray, sing, dance, and be visible for the first time in my life was like learning a new language, the language of belonging." Cue biggest full body chill right now. It's clear. When faith becomes supportive rather than coercive and controlling, it heals. It does not erase pain, but it validates your experience. It does not demand conformity, but it celebrates existence. And that is the opposite of what conversion therapy has ever promised. Now, not to beat a dead horse, I'm sure there's another term I could have used that was like maybe more appropriate, but not to beat a dead horse. Let's revisit conversion therapy's impact in both emotional and cultural ways. Emotionally, survivors struggle with internalized shame, that anxiety, depression, and very complex PTSD. And culturally, it reinforces heteronormativity, patriarchal structures, and the policing of religious morality. Public figures, clergy, and policymaking have all contributed, either through silence or complicity, to a system that allows these programs to flourish. And that's why survivor voices are so crucial. Without them, it's just theory. This is all just theory. And with them, it's reality. It's lived experiences that demand recognition, legislation, and empathy, and their experiences are facts and evidence. I have a few quotes that I want to share from news sources that illustrate this broader perspective. NBC News reported, "Conversion therapy has been linked to higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide among LGBTQ+ youth." The New York Times wrote, "Despite widespread condemnation by major medical associations, conversion therapy persists in many US states and internationally, often hidden within religious communities." And Reuters highlighted global context. "In some countries, conversion therapy is legal and actively promoted, posing significant human rights concerns." Context, context, context. It is everywhere, even when people pretend it's gone extinct. Okay. Let's take a breath. Let's breathe in. Let's exhale. Finally, let's begin to close this out. Survivors, affirming clergy, and progressive religious communities show us that healing and liberation is possible. The stories are different, the journeys are unique, but the themes are universal. Reclaim your story, find your community, practice radical self-acceptance, and challenge the systems that taught you to doubt your worth. They are not the only systems that exist. In other words, live your queer life unapologetically, even if your church and your parents and your friends or the internet and the Bible say otherwise, or how the Bible's explained to you says otherwise. So, as we wrap this up, let yourself feel both like the weight of this and the relief, knowing that people found, I guess they found salvation, but they found it within themselves. And if you're a survivor, I'm glad that you found yourself and know that you're seen. If you're an ally, know that you still have work to do. And if you are a religious leader, maybe think about whether your theology is about control or whether it's about love. That's the difference between harm and healing and between fear and faith. We spent a long time talking about this, focusing on these words, the reflections, the stories of survivors, reading their blogs, memoirs, essays, and letting them tell their own truths, which I absolutely loved. And I hope you heard their courage, their pain, their resilience, and that it gave you a better sense of the lived experiences behind the headlines and the summaries that I've done and many others have done. If you want to keep the conversation going, don't forget to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod. Submit your own stories, or you can pitch some topic ideas on the website, hotairwithjoshuarobert.com. .com. Sorry, I meant to say hotairwithjoshuarobert.com. And as always, subscribe, like, share, leave your ratings, send this episode to someone that you think needs to hear this information. Your support helps these stories and my voice reach more people and amplify voices that deserve to be heard. So stay bold, stay brave, And remember, sometimes the best way to honor survivors is simply to listen to them and share their voices. And with that, I will see you next Tuesday.